The claw rattled, descended, and scooped up another packet of lollies. Yes! Hissed Giselle. She grabbed the packet out of the prize tray. Usually it was impossible to win anything from these machines. Today must be her lucky day. She'd won twice now. Oi, you! The attendant stormed over and snatched the packet out of Giselle's hand. Giselle glared at him. Hey! Didn't you see the sign? The attendant jabbed a grubby finger at the prize machine. The words "out of order" were scrawled on a piece of paper. Giselle had seen the sign, but she had also seen a businessman in dark glasses win a prize from the same machine 5 minutes earlier. That'd be right, she thought. Adults get to do whatever they like, but as soon as it's my turn... The attendant was already walking away between the rows of arcade machines. Race cars roared, laser guns blasted, pinballs rattled. A woman seemed to be playing air hockey against herself, the puck cracking against the sides of the table. Giselle chased after the attendant. That's mine! Give it back! He turned around and fixed her with a bloodshot eye. The machine is defective, he said through gritted teeth. You can't win prizes from a defective machine. Wrong. Giselle thought about the prize in her school bag. She'd won it before the attendant noticed her, and she was definitely keeping it. Why are you being so petty? She demanded. Those lollies didn't even look good. If they didn't look good, why are you so desperate to keep them? The attendant asked suspiciously. Ugh, this is so unfair. Giselle turned and stomped away towards the other end of the Extra Life arcade. She avoided the other claw machines. If he wasn't going to let her keep any prizes, what was the point? The arcade was almost empty. She could play any other game she wanted. One of the dancing games caught her eye. Not as much fun as strutting on the beam at gymnastics class, maybe, but at least it was something physical, unlike the driving or shooting games. The woman at the air hockey table was watching her. As Giselle dug out her swipe card, she thought about the businessman she had seen earlier. He had walked up to the counter, bought a swipe card with cash, swiped it in the supposedly broken machine, and walked out with a packet of lollies. Why hadn't the attendant stopped him? And what was a grown man doing here without his kids anyway? Some mysteries are unsolvable, Mum always said, like a mantra. It was as though she wished it was true, like she wanted life to be frustrating. Grumbling, Giselle swiped her card on the dance machine. Error. Insufficient funds. She frowned. Mum had put $500 on the card. It was an over-the-top present, an apology for suddenly dragging Giselle to this stupid town. Giselle swiped again. Error. Insufficient funds. Her heart sank as she realised what must have happened. That claw machine was defective. It had taken all her money in exchange for 2 lousy prizes, one of which had been confiscated. Outraged, Giselle started walking back to the counter. The attendant was on the phone. I don't know, all right, just some kid, he was saying. A girl. 13, maybe? Giselle slowed down. The attendant hadn't seen her yet. She ducked behind a zombie game console. I told her the machine wasn't working and she couldn't keep the prize, the attendant continued. But I think she's still around here somewhere. There was a pause. The fuzzy sounds of exploding zombies filled Giselle's ear for a moment. And then, okay, I'll go get her. Somehow, Giselle didn't think he wanted to give her a refund. Hey, the attendant called out. Little girl? Giselle gritted her teeth. Little girl? She was almost 14. I need to talk to you. Hello? Giselle crept around the far side of the zombie console, keeping it between her and the attendant. He was blocking her path to the exit. There was a fire door near the back of the arcade. It would lead her out of the shopping centre, but an alarm could go off if she opened it. Little girl, where are you? Giselle made her decision. She eased through the shadows towards the fire door. Suddenly, she saw the air hockey player staring at her. Giselle put her finger to her lips, her eyes wide and pleading. The air hockey player called out, Robbie, she's over here! Horrified, Giselle ran towards the fire door. She could hear the attendant dashing after her, catching up. As she ran, Giselle shrugged off her backpack and flung it into his path. She heard a scuffle, a grunt, and a thud as he tripped over it. She hit the fire door with both hands and burst out into the daylight. An alarm screamed. And then strong hands grabbed the back of her hoodie and dragged her back into the shadows. No! She cried. Help! The air hockey player clamped a hand over Giselle's mouth. I got her, she told the attendant. No thanks to you, Robbie. Giselle tried to bite the player's hand, but it didn't work. The palm covered her whole mouth. She just chewed on nothing. The fire door fell shut, cutting the alarm. Will you stop squirming? The player snapped. She had blonde hair and grey eyes with wrinkles around them. The attendant, Robbie, grabbed Giselle's ankles. He and the player carried her through the empty arcade and towards the counter. Giselle wriggled like a caterpillar but couldn't get free. Her heart was racing. They dragged her behind the counter and through a door marked Staff Only into a bare concrete room with the walls lined with duffel bags. A single light dangled from the high ceiling. There was a toolbox in one corner and a baseball bat. Not much else. Giselle wasn't sure what the staff room of a game arcade was supposed to look like, but this definitely wasn't it. Extra Life is a fake arcade, she realised. The real business is something else. The player dragged over a rickety wooden chair. Robbie plonked Giselle into it and held her down. Go get some rope, the player said. From where? Robbie demanded. You won't get away with this, Giselle growled. Shut up, the player scanned the room. Use the tape in the toolbox. Robbie grabbed a roll of electrical tape and wound it around Giselle's wrists while the player held her still. Then he taped each of Giselle's ankles to the legs of the chair. Panic filled Giselle's chest as she struggled. The tape was loose enough that she could squirm, but tight enough that she couldn't get free. We should call Idris, Robbie said. Not yet. The player stepped back and examined Giselle. Who sent you? The cops, Giselle lied. They know everything. They're on their way here. Robbie looked nervous, but the player wasn't fooled. Liar, the police are barking up the wrong tree entirely. We've made sure of it. Who are you really working for? Giselle said nothing. If she admitted that she had no clue what they were talking about, they would start thinking about ways to get rid of her. Wrong answer. The woman walked over to the far side of the room and picked up a baseball bat. Okay, Giselle said quickly. I'll tell you. Her mind was racing. She had an idea about what the criminals might be doing, but if she was wrong, they would realise she knew nothing and had told no one. Make it fast, the player said. You're laundering money, Giselle guessed. Criminals come in with cash, you take it and load it onto game cards, they spend the cards on the out-of-order prize machine. She does know everything! Robbie looked alarmed. I'm calling Idris. He pulled out his phone and retreated to the corner. The player shook Giselle's chair. Her brain rattled in her skull. We know all that, the player snapped. Who sent you? Robbie was muttering urgently into the phone. Susie. Giselle immediately regretted using her mother's name. Susie who? The player asked suspiciously. Susie Smith. She works for the Financial Crimes Task Force. She's on her way here. Giselle thought this sounded pretty good, but the player wasn't buying it. Tell me the truth, she roared, raising the baseball bat. Her voice reverberated around the concrete walls. I am, Giselle insisted, bracing her toes against the floor. The player swung the bat. But Giselle was ready. Just like in gymnastics, it was all about timing. She pushed off her toes, tipping the chair over backwards. The bat missed her and hit the support struts instead, smashing the chair to pieces. The player staggered backwards, shielding her face from the flying splinters. Robbie dropped his phone and ran over, looking alarmed. Giselle rolled over, her hands still bound behind her back. He tried to grab her, but missed. She scrambled to her feet. Grab her! The player bellowed, but Robbie slipped over a broken chair leg and landed on his face, so clumsily that he could almost have done it on purpose. Giselle might have laughed if she hadn't been so scared. She ran for the staff room door. Luckily, it was push, not pull. She crashed through it head first and kept running. Shards of wood were still taped to her ankles, clacking against the floor. The player was right behind her. As Giselle ran around the corner, the player vaulted over it, carrying the bat. Help! Giselle screamed. Someone help me! But the fake arcade was deserted. She was on her own. Her backpack was on the floor nearby. It should still have the other prize in it. Evidence. Giselle darted sideways so she could scoop it up as she dashed towards the way out. The player was catching up to her. Get back here, you little rat! Giselle ran out through the front door of Extra Life and into the shopping centre. Phone retailers, chemists and watch repair places glowed all around her. Most of them had shutters over their doors. It was nearly closing time. Giselle turned around and around, looking for someone to save her. There! A lone police officer was coming up the escalator towards this level, his badge and hat gleaming. Almost weeping with relief, Giselle ran towards him. The cop's eyes widened as he took in the tape around her wrists and ankles. What's going on, miss? Giselle talked rapidly, the words all getting tangled up in one another. I was in Extra Life and I won a prize I wasn't supposed to win and this lady tied me up and she's coming. Please help! The player was running towards them. She didn't even try to hide the baseball bat. Get behind me. The police officer turned to the player. Hey, you! Why are you terrorizing this young girl? The player stopped running, but said nothing, her eyes narrow. Drop the weapon, the cop said. The player did. The bat clanged against the floor and rolled towards the barrier which overlooked the escalator and the ground floor. It nudged the glass. Bonk. The cop grabbed his radio. Officer requesting assistance at Belconnen Shopping Centre. He grabbed Giselle's shoulder without waiting for a reply. Come with me, kid. Your safety is my #1 priority. Something about this struck Giselle as false. It seemed like the kind of thing a person would only think to say if they didn't mean it. Who called you? She asked the cop. He didn't reply. Giselle remembered the player's confidence. The police are barking up the wrong tree entirely. We've made sure of it. It was as though the criminals had someone on the inside. She glanced at the police officer's name badge. Idris. Giselle tried to get out of Idris's grip, but his hand felt as steely as the claw from the prize machine. Relax, he said. I'm a police officer. Giselle didn't doubt it, but that didn't mean he wasn't one of the bad guys. She couldn't get out of his grip, but she could reach the glass barrier. She lifted her bound hands and twisted her arms so her backpack dangled over the safety rail. Let me go, she said, or I'll drop it. A crooked smile crossed the cop's face. So? Some of your prizes are in it, Giselle said. From the machine. I don't know what they are, but I know they're worth a lot of money. Are they fragile? The cop and the player both looked alarmed. That's a yes, Giselle said. The player reached for the baseball bat. Don't, Giselle warned. I'll drop the bag. The player hesitated. You haven't thought this through, kid, Idris said. You can't stand there forever. I don't have to, Giselle said. Any minute now, someone else will come along, like a security guard or... Suddenly she could hear distant sirens. The real police were coming. The player shoved Idris. He let go of Giselle, who stumbled sideways. I thought you were pretending to call for backup, the player snapped. I was, Idris insisted. Then who called the real cops? Hey, I am a real cop. You know what I mean. Giselle edged away, keeping her arms behind her, the backpack still hanging over the drop. The player noticed. Hey! Idris whirled around and tried to grab Giselle again. Too slow. Giselle backflipped over the railing. No! Idris swiped at the empty air. Giselle was already out of reach, falling past the glass barrier, dazzled by the downlights in the distant ceiling, her hands still tied behind her back. She let go of the backpack so it wouldn't throw off her balance. Giselle spun like an orbiting comet, legs together, shoulders tucked back, just like in gymnastics. Thud! A perfect landing, right on the rubber handrail of the escalator. Her backpack plummeted past the escalator and crashed down on the distant floor of the level below. The handrail trundled down to the bottom floor, carrying Giselle with it. She grinned up at the criminals. Idris drew his stun gun. Get after her! The player wasn't willing to attempt the same jump. She snatched up the bat and ran back towards the top of the escalator. Giselle hopped off the handrail and landed on the moving steps. There was a sharp crack and a fizzing sound as Idris fired the stun gun above her. He missed. The electrified needles crackled against the metal under her shoes. Giselle ran down the escalator as fast as she dared. Her hands were still bound. If she tripped, she wouldn't be able to break her fall. The impact would crack her skull. Idris didn't try a second shot. Giselle could hear him arguing up above. Robbie, why are you... Hey! The player was right behind her, catching up. Giselle wasn't going to make it. Freeze! 4 police officers were at the bottom of the escalator. Giselle hesitated, not sure whose side they were on. The player turned and fled back up the escalator. After her! One of the police shouted. 2 officers pushed past Giselle and ran up the steps. It was almost funny. Because they and the player were all running against the flow of the escalator, the chase was in slow motion. Giselle reached the bottom of the escalator, where the other 2 officers were waiting for her. One of them cut through the electrical tape with a pair of flex cuff snippers. At last Giselle's hands were free. There are 3 criminals up there. She rubbed her wrists as the blood flowed back into her hands. One of them is dressed as a cop, or maybe he is a cop? Actually, said the officer with the snippers, there are only 2. Giselle was about to ask what he meant when the player reached the top of the escalator and was crash-tackled by Robbie. What are you doing? The woman screamed as Robbie tightened police cuffs around her wrists. I'm arresting you for suspicion of money laundering and other associated charges, Robbie said. It feels so good to finally say that. Robbie's with us. He's been undercover for months, the officer next to Giselle explained. She was a woman with a narrow chin and long eyelashes. Her name tag read Wainthropp. The goal was to lure Idris here so we could catch him red-handed. You gave him the perfect excuse. At the top of the escalator, the player was being pulled to her feet by other officers. Strangely, she was laughing. "Where's your proof?" she said. "Take a look in the machine." Wainthropp's phone rang. She answered. "Yeah?" Then her eyes widened. "What do you mean the diamonds are gone?" "No evidence at all," the player cackled. "You've got nothing." "Someone else must be here," Wainthropp said. "Search the shopping centre. Find them. Without those diamonds, we don't have a case." Giselle thought of the businessman with the dark glasses. She tried to remember his face, his height, the kind of suit he'd been wearing, but she couldn't quite get a grip on the details. Her eyes fell on her sagging backpack lying next to the escalator. "Wait," she said. She unzipped it and took out the prize. Inside the lolly packet she could feel something hard and sharp. "What is it?" Wainthropp asked. "Evidence," Giselle said, and she ripped the packet open.